Olenick. It's a real pleasure to have you here this evening, Michael, on Wide Awake News. And really want to thank Charlie for giving us the opportunity to have some of the conversations you and I have on a regular basis here for everyone to hear. Now, let's talk just a little bit about how you and I got to know one another. I was an attorney slogging out in the trenches. I call it the guerrilla wars of foreclosure defense. And you were a data researcher and a Wall Street kind of guy doing your own bit of and our paths crossed about the time that we got to realize that something was really wrong in foreclosure in the financial markets, right?
Yeah, we saw the entire system was completely impaired. I came at things really as a data researcher. I worked for lawyers, I worked for bankers, but one thing we saw along during and then after the collapse was a lot of dysfunction in the system, and what originally looked like dysfunction or mistakes really turned out to be just outright corruption at a scale that, to this day, I think that most people don't understand and don't realize that even after all the books and the movies, and we're still unfolding this like an onion, and it seems like we haven't barely made it past the first layer or two.
And I think that was one of the things that was similar in our experiences. As a foreclosure defense attorney that at that time had only had, maybe 100 cases or so, I found things that were so wrong, they were inexplicable, and I couldn't believe that our legal system were allowing such errors to occur. And now here we are many years later. It's apparent to me that this is indeed systemic. It's not that just there were a couple law firms doing things badly, or that there were a couple lawyers doing things badly, but the entire system is so permeated with, on the one hand, careless errors, sloppiness, things gone wrong, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is outright fraud, crimes, and criminality.
Yeah, it's unlike anything. I think we've talked about this story before, but I started this with as the economy was melting down, a bankruptcy lawyer hired me to write a computer analytics program to help intakes better because his volume was going up high, and specifically to look for fraud. Bankruptcy lawyers get in terrible problems if their clients put in false information. And so we were writing that and putting it together, putting in his cases and others to test them. And what the computer program kept saying were patterns of fraud in the foreclosures, the wrong dates, wrong banks. But the fraud, the mistakes were never from the debtors, never. And hundreds of, it was always from the banks. And eventually he kind of lost interest. Mine perked up because I've been doing other work for a lot longer. And we poured in more and more cases and began to see just systemic problems of fraud. These weren't one-off issues. Fraud became the norm rather than the mistake. And I began to contact some others saying, he kind of drifted away, but began to say, he eventually said, your program has to be wrong. And I said, it can't look at these numbers. And when we check it with the debtors, when we check it with this, it isn't wrong. And we check it with the court records over and over again when it's finding the patterns are there. And we began to network, and you were, I think, then a budding foreclosure defense lawyer, and you were much less adamant. You were like, there might be some issues, I'll do my best to defend people. And then, as we began to compile our information, compile our data, compile our patterns, network with more people, what we saw was, and tell me if you think it's wrong, arguably the largest pattern of fraud we've ever seen in U.S. history. Millions and millions of court cases just completely, hopelessly frauded up.
And that's the thing that, looking back to that period in time, and that's, before 2008, as an attorney, I would see in virtually every single foreclosure case was filed, these allegations that they had lost the promissory note. And that was standard practice and procedure at that point in time, that these plaintiffs and these banks and these institutions, when they were filing foreclosure to take home away, it could be millions of dollars worth of mortgages or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of mortgages, and yet the banks and the lawyers were claiming that they had lost these promissory notes. Right. And then that went on for many, many years, and we still see that to a lesser extent even today. But what's become apparent as we kept challenging that and saying, hold on a second, Bank of America or Citi or Wells or Chase or pick your big bank, you can't have lost these notes. And what it turns out after years of litigating these cases is that the notes probably weren't lost. They just did not want to go through the amount of effort required to find that original promissory note. So when you have that kind of wide-scale fraud on a big basis, it's really quite disturbing. But even more disturbing is the fact that our courts let them get away with that for so long.
It's not just our courts, too. I mean, remember, there were two reasons that I think they don't want to turn over the promissory notes. One was issues with finding them and organizing. But the other, and this one is really important, and we'll get to why in a second, they didn't trust, we know this now, we didn't know it, they didn't trust their own lawyers. And why that's really important is because a few of those lawyers ended up to be shady, and that's putting it mildly, and these notes are bearer bonds. They're basically like having a blank check that's still open and that you can legally, fill your name in and cash to people. And where it becomes really interesting is these law firms, these incompetent at best, crooked at medium, and just how I won't even go there, were chosen specifically by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, government agencies sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars in the backing of the U.S. government, who had been warned 10 years before, we know that now too, that these law firms were shoddy at best, were turning around and saying, yes, if it's a Fannie and Freddie note, you have to use this, and by default banks were using them too. They were in a whole lot better. So you really had the government just flat out endorsing known crooks. Not only endorsing, making the crooks rich by sending enormous amounts, and they left just a giant mess behind, and it's just like the banking mess up for everybody else to clean up.
And I think that's a really important thing that people need to understand is when we're talking about this foreclosure issue, that all across the country, as these banks and institutions are busy throwing their neighbors out into the street, they're doing so with instruments that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars and cumulatively billions of dollars. And the sloppiness with which they engaged in this systemic practice is absolutely mind-boggling. You and I see it on the front lines every day, but all of America needs to understand that, whatever respect we might have given to these banks and institutions, feeling that we could trust them, both with their own business operations, but then, frankly, with our money, is grossly misplaced. And I think that's one thing that a lesson we all take from this whole catastrophe that continues to unfold.
Yeah, it's like a joke almost. I mean, people say, if you get a good deal, take the money and run. Well, they took the money and they ran, but the problem was they borrowed it from our children, and they ran away with it, and it's still gone, and it's not a few dollars, it's tens of trillions of dollars, and it's still ongoing. We still don't know where the bottom is. We just saw today the FHA announced that they're going to start borrowing money from Treasury. They're broke, the latest one. Fannie and Freddie now have abolished any, the private ownership. They stripped the value of whatever stock was left. So really a government agency, even though it's still claimed to be private, and refused to answer Freedom of Information Act requests. The Federal Reserve continues to buy these securities at high amounts, pretending they're worth 100%, 100 cents on the dollar, when we know they're worth anywhere from a little bit less to much, much less that.
All right, looks like we're going to take a little break here, Mike, so we'll talk back on the other side.
Okay.
We will find you acting on your best behavior. Turn your back on Mother Nature. Everybody wants to rule
Charlie McGrath of WideAwakeNews.com here with a question for my friends at Austin Rare Coins and Bullion. What do they know that we don't? Insiders and a who's who list of elite have made it crystal clear that we are headed for catastrophe, putting out warning after warning, urging people to batten down the hatches. Billionaire George Soros has recently been dumping stocks and at the same time acquiring millions in gold. In fact, in a recent interview, he was quoted as saying, "I'm not here to cheer you up. The situation is as serious and difficult as I've experienced in my career. Out of control government deficit spending and a Federal Reserve that's only solution seems to be print more fiat currency will lead to a weaker dollar and massive inflation on necessity items such as energy and food. If you have wealth to protect, please visit my friends at Austin Rare Coins and Bullion. Gabe Elton and the folks at Austin Rare Coins and Bullion have many Wide Awake News customers because they're honest, they're fair, and they won't sell you paper promises or product they do not have. Call Gabe Elton at 800-552-4109. That number again, 800-552-4109, or visit them online at austincoins.com.
Remember this name, Carnivora. That's CARNIVORA.com. What if I told you that this 100% pure and natural product was delivered directly to the White House at President Reagan's personal request at a time when only the president was able to obtain it? Reagan used this amazing product, Carnivora, successfully, a product derived only from nature that has the intelligence to instinctively attack abnormal cells only without harming a single normal cell, and the power to actually wake up critical immune cells from dormancy to attack foreign invaders that don't belong in our bodies. Carnivora is now obtainable by anyone who wants to get healthy and stay that way. Call 1-866-VENUS-FLY and protect yourself with 17 naturally occurring compounds that will unleash powerful immune defense. That's 1-866-VENUS-FLY. Call 1-866-VENUS-FLY and get your Carnivora today. Visit carnivora.com.
Have you ever wanted to generate your own supply of electrical power, even save money on your electric bill? If so, this is going to be the most important message you will ever hear. Solar power generators are now available. These emergency backup systems provide life-saving electrical power when you need it most. Unlike gas generators, a solar generator runs quietly, emits no fumes, and produces electricity from the sun. It's like having an electric power plant running quietly in your own home. Run sump pumps, shortwave radios, computers, and even keep your food from spoiling. Whether it's hurricanes, ice storms, brownouts, or blackouts, you'll never suffer through painful power outages again. And here's the best news. A remarkable fall truckload sale going on right now that gets you $1,700 in bonuses when you buy a solar generator. To find out why solar generators are the best generators and get $1,700 for doing so, go to falltruckloadsale.com. That's falltruckloadsale.com. Generate your own supply of electricity. Go to falltruckloadsale.com. That's falltruckloadsale.com.
Will 2012 bring the Mayan end of world or the global banking collapse? In 2007, one man, Mike Dillard, made 5 predictions which forecasted the 2008 economic crisis and the pending Eurozone collapse. This week, Mike unleashes 3 brand new, shocking, must-watch videos with predictions for the coming year. www.the3videos.com. Over the past year, Mike Dillard has helped thousands of ordinary people create and recover wealth by tapping into the black box investing strategies the big banks don't want you to know about. www.the3videos.com. As the European banking system implodes and governments collapse at breakneck speeds, the next 12 months will be the most anticipated and important months in modern human history. This will make 2008 look like a walk in the park. Everyone will be affected. Go to www.the3videos.com now. Learn how to prepare your family and prosper during the global financial collapse.
All right, so great. Thanks, everyone, for sticking with us here through the break. We're chatting with Charlie here on the IEM. I've got with me our live guest, Micheal Olenick. Michael's a good friend of mine, a researcher, a data analyst. We're talking a little bit about how we got to know one another. I was a foreclosure defense attorney. Mike was a Wall Street guy on the finance side of things, and our paths crossed at the intersection of finance and the legal community where things are getting even worse even as we speak. You know, one point that Mike and I were talking about over the break, and this may be the biggest takeaway that we want everybody to understand, is that when you hear about foreclosure, when you hear about the banks and institutions, particularly in the context of foreclosure, what we really need to be talking about is understanding that this is the federal government that's foreclosing on Americans. And if it's not the federal government, it's even worse. It's the foreign institutions. But the fact of the matter is, we have to understand that when Bank of America or Wells or Citi or Chase or any of these other institutions are foreclosing on our neighbors, on ourselves, they are merely the bagmen or the debt collectors that are operating on behalf of the federal government. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the USDA, the VA, these are the real owners. These are the real parties in interest in these foreclosure cases. And the banks and institutions are just the stand-ins that are doing the dirty work.
Yeah, I mean, we see it over and over. Half the loans are owned by Fannie or Freddie. FHA, like it said, just went bust again today. But we don't know that, and they won't put their name up on these foreclosures. They won't admit to it. And the ultimate irony is they turn around and they scream, especially Fannie and Freddie, we won't reduce principal, it's the free market. And the truth is, if the free market operated, there would be no Fannie, there would be no Freddie. All of these, they would have burnt down to the ground back in 2007, 2008 without their bailouts. The notes would have been sold off, auctioned off for a few pennies on the dollars to new lenders, and those people would have refinanced not only the people who were delinquent, but to everybody, and they would have made a bundle doing it.
Look, here's the point that becomes really clear, and this is the real scary part about the whole thing. I do a lot of short sales, or I'll try and work something out with a homeowner. But when a homeowner hits a brick wall because they can't get any flexibility out of their bank or their institution who they think owns the note mortgage, in many cases, the wizard behind the curtain that's pulling the string is Fannie and Freddie. And here's a point. I'm going to drive it home real clearly. Oftentimes when you're doing a short sale, you can get very easily a waiver of liability. They'll say, hey, we'll accept $100,000, write off the difference, and the homeowner goes their way. But it's very difficult, and up until very recently, almost impossible, to get a waiver of deficiency when a loan was owned by Fannie or Freddie. And the response that you'd always get, you'd get Bank of America saying, hey, we'll accept that short sale, we'll close, but we will not put in writing that we won't come after the homeowner. But, and they would always say this, but we know that Fannie or Freddie never goes after the homeowner. They do not pursue deficiencies. And here's what I believe is true. The reason why Fannie or Freddie will not put in writing that they will not pursue deficiencies is because if they put in writing they weren't pursuing deficiencies, they would have to admit to Congress and to the American people that the amount of the outstanding liabilities is far greater to many degrees than they're currently reporting to Congress or to the American people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, other banks too, but especially Fannie and Freddie, by taking the deficiencies and holding them on their books as if they were a part. I mean, this is a game they've been playing forever, right? They have the $700,000 house mortgage for $700,000 and a house worth $100. They pretend it's worth $700. The other thing they do is they delay, they recapitalize and say, fine, you have a mortgage for $400, the house is worth, I don't know, $150. We'll recapitalize, so we'll take on, principal and interest, and we'll give you a new loan for $500,000, but we'll put it on 40 years and we'll put a giant balloon at the end of 40 years. The reason they're doing that is to cook their books. I mean, there's really nothing to it, and it's our money at the end of the day. So from a foreclosure side, they should be signing their names, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. Few of them are, but the overwhelming majority aren't. That it is the federal government who is foreclosing on people. And on the other side, from the congressional side, they should be saying, we're broke. We have a bunch of absolutely worthless debt. I mean, the only thing we could do with this is, take a few million Americans and force them to declare bankruptcy to prove it's worthless.
Well, that's exactly right. And, when you look at accounting, and again, you're the numbers guy, but when you look at what's being reported, whether it's on the balance sheets of Fannie and Freddie or the balance sheets of the banks and institutions or the numbers that are being reported to Congress, these are all delusions, fabrications, propaganda. The numbers absolutely are not real. A great example of that is here in the state of Florida. When they're discussing the magnitude of the outstanding debt, or when Fannie is reporting to Congress the amount of the assets that they're holding on to, they are principally relying on the principal amount of the note mortgage. So, we all know, some of these very conservative reporting is that there's, 40% underwater. It's far greater than that. Look, we got a break coming up. We'll catch it on the other side.
And I'm not feeling right. All
Charlie McGrath of WideAwakeNews.com here with a message about Legacy Premium freeze-dried storable food, available at BuyEmergencyFoods.com. I recently returned from a trip to the manufacturing facility, and I'm here to tell you it was impressive. Over 50 employees working hard to produce the highest quality, best tasting, most healthy, certified GMO-free, freeze-dried storable food on the market. And now that I've been to the manufacturing facility, I can tell you, from receiving to production to shipping, these guys have one thing in mind. That is quality. Plain and simple. Please do yourself, do your loved ones a favor. Be prepared for an uncertain future with Legacy Premium freeze-dried storable foods available at BuyEmergencyFoods.com. You can call them at 888-543-7345. That number again, 888-543-7345. Or better yet, visit them online at BuyEmergencyFoods.com.
You're listening to Charlie nationwide and worldwide on the internet on the Rinse Radio Network. Known worldwide as the most consistently fascinating, informative, and unique program on radio, the Jeff Rince program can be yours to listen to anytime, anywhere, whenever you want to hear it. For pennies a day, our subscribers can download any of Jeff's thousands of programs featuring a treasury of newsmakers, researchers, eyewitnesses, and incredible subjects, all in MP3 commercial-free, crystal-clear 56-bit digital sound, and take these often unforgettable programs with them wherever they go. As a subscriber, you can also listen live at airtime, online, anywhere in the world, or browse through our archives of over 10,000 hours of legendary broadcasts. Subscribe now by taking the link at the top of Rense.com and enrich your mind with the most unique panorama of vital information and the best independent, honest journalism in radio. Look for the Subscribe Now link on Rense.com and give yourself the knowledge you need for these unprecedented times.
Heart-related health problems affect millions of people each year. Maybe you're one of the many who suffer from issues related to angina pain, high blood pressure, congestive heart failure, unbalanced cholesterol, irregular heartbeat, or clogged arteries. There is a solution that doesn't involve expensive prescription drugs that only mask the problem and leave you with horrible side effects. If you are ready to live your life free of sickness, pain, and fear, live your life with increased vitality, energy, and youthfulness, and experience your body healing itself, then you're ready for Heart and Body Extract from Healthy Hearts Club. Heart and Body Extract has a 23-year proven track record of using certified organic herbs that make up an excellent formula to balance and support the heart and circulatory system. In as little as 2 weeks, you can feel amazing results when your 2-month supply of Heart and Body Extract today. Call 1-866-295-5305 or go to hbextract.com.
Who can it be knocking at my door? Well, that's the question we all need to be asking ourselves. And if you think it's the bank knocking at your door, if you think because you're writing a mortgage to Bank of America or Wells or Citi, you need to understand that the reality is the banks and institutions are really public utilities now. They're owned by the federal government, Fannie and Freddie. They are really obligors on all of this debt. And really, that's a big point that all of America needs to understand. So, you know, we're getting these solicitations. Americans are getting solicitations to the banks. Say, refinance your mortgage from Bank of America or Citi or Wells or whatever. Or a really current phenomena is what I call these lottery letters. Americans are getting these letters from banks, and they're saying, we're going to reduce your principal down by 35% or 40%. And I've had many clients ask me, is it true? Is it really? And the fact of the matter is, yeah, it's true. The part of this, I call it the 49 state attorney general sellout, was the federal government in collusion with the state attorneys general working for the banks and institutions have ordered principal reductions, essentially, and ordered the private trusts to reduce down the debt that are owned on these properties. Now, look, if you're the homeowner and you get that lottery letter and it says your mortgage has been wiped off clean or it's been reduced by 40%, that's good news for you. But you got to also understand that on the other side of that letter is a private investor who also lost 40% of that that investment. So look, it's just the federal government working in collusion with the banks and institutions to fulfill their own interests. Scary stuff, really scary stuff.
Yeah, when they use words like too big to fail, what they really mean is of us.
Yeah. Well,
We're not gonna, yeah.
the question there in the chat room is John Corzine ever going to be arrested? Of course he's not going to be arrested.
No.
Neither will Jamie Dimon, and neither will Blankfeld from Goldman Sachs. These folks are just as much a part of the government, and they have all the full faith and credit and the protection of the government as if they were the president himself. These guys are all so tightly connected that they're going to be arrested absent some kind of a dramatic revolution in this country. And look, there's no more clear example, I think, than Corzine, but there have been so many other just in the last, couple months here where, these folks that sitting up at the top of the financial pyramids are looting the public treasury and the private treasury, and they're getting away with it. There's zero consequence for it.
Yeah, zero. No, there's a consequence, Matt. When they steal a few $1 billion, they typically have to pay back a fraction of 1%.
Yeah, which is something I always keep talking about, this 49 state attorney general settlement, and not enough people have paid attention to it. Not enough people understand that what that settlement was really about was they caught the banks and institutions robbing Fannie, Freddie, FDIC by filing false insurance claims to the tunes of billions of dollars. And when they got caught, not only did they get caught, they told the federal government, the Office of Inspector General, we're not going to participate in your investigation. We're not going to make our employees available. We're not going to produce documents. We're not going to let you know just how badly we've been robbing and ripping off the federal taxpayers and Fannie and Freddie and FDIC. But so when they concocted this settlement, they talk about $25 billion, it's never going to reach that number. The fact of the matter is that you and I and our children are paying for the billions of dollars that the banks and institutions have stolen from us as they were acting as debt collectors and fraudulent actors for Fannie and Freddie. One of the things I think I want to focus on here for a second is all of us that are in this space of public awareness, and I think all of the listeners here on Wide Awake, and certainly everybody paying attention to Charlie, are aware. They're awake. They are alive. But we all know we confront people that refuse to accept the reality of what we're aware of. And, they'll accuse us of being conspiracy theorists and what kind of radio are you listening to or what are you paying attention to? That's why it's critically important that all of us that are in this space of awareness be able to point to first source documentation. So you have to be able to drill down to real news sources. And look, we all know the mainstream media isn't where you're going to get it from. So when talking about things like the banks and institutions are stealing from FDIC and Fannie and Freddie, we need to be able to point directly to government documents. And, hell, there's websites out there where the Office of Inspector General have produced their audit reports and the 49 State Attorney General settlement. The document, the lawsuits are right there. All those documents are right there. And we need to be relying on those. And those of us that are engaging in this conversation and trying to convince others that this is real, you need to have access to those documents and read them so that you're referencing those kind of documents and not reporting on any other websites, because it'll give you authority when you can report in such a manner.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways, remember we're talking about how we met each other and came across this, was aggregation of a lot of raw data. And you begin to see patterns in it. And it's not, at some point when the machines are telling you, look, we're looking at a sample of 500,000 lawsuits and banks have pled errors in 60,000 of them. And that's what banks have admitted to, over 10%. We don't have to turn around and say, okay, we're a conspiracy theorist. No. Something is very wrong there.
The best example of that, Michael, was that law firm and that back firm operations of the law firm that was operating in this state. You pointed me to the Securities and Exchange Commission website and the prospectus that were being filed there. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, when I first was reading what was put in black and white and filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, which laid out what this law firm was doing here in the state of Florida, it blew my mind. But I often cited to that in my website, and when you're making these arguments and you're pointing to that kind of documentation, that can't be argued with.
Yeah, well, the raw numbers really speak for themselves, and even some of the crooks, just because they get a lot of legal protection. You know about this. If they disclose, sometimes they do disclose, but they stick it and they bury it deep down in their documents, and you really have to kind of be tenacious and dig through it and find it. You know, the one though, again, getting back to Fannie and Freddie, who doesn't disclose, is Fannie and Freddie. They still have their on one hand, they operate with the best of both worlds. On one, they're private companies when it comes to not having to disclose. They're better than private companies. They're kind of super trusted private companies. When they don't have to answer Freedom of Information Act requests, when they're able to pay out big bonuses, when they're able to pay big salaries, when they sit arrogant like they're actually running a real business. But when it's time to go and run like a real business and time to be hitting bankruptcy court and time to be, then all of a sudden they're a government agency. So they're a little bit of one and a little bit of the other, but except for Fannie and Freddie, who we have almost no visibility on, despite federal laws were passed in 2008 saying they're supposed to be disclosing more, that they've been all but ignoring. Some of the others, yeah, I'd really encourage listeners to, get out there and try to dig through this information. It's there.
So just yesterday, I had oral arguments in the Second District Court of Appeals here in Florida. And believe it or not, one of the key issues in this case was I went to trial where a homeowner was losing his home. He was getting thrown out into the street. The lawyer stood up in courtroom almost a year ago, and he said, Your Honor, we can't tell you who owns this loan. And if you try to force us who actually owns this loan, who's actually forcing us to throw this American out into the street, we might as well dismiss the case right now. And that was the issue I brought before the court. I said to the appellate court, Your Honor, they admitted at trial court, they cannot or they don't want to tell you who it is that owns this loan, who it is that's directing them to throw my client out into the street. And this was the appeal that I brought before the Second District Court of Appeal. And I got to tell you, I'm really scared. I'm afraid we're going to get this appellate decision, and the appellate court here in the state of Florida is just going to say, you know what, it doesn't matter who owns this. And the public consciousness, we are talking about Fannie and Freddie, and we think they own something like 60% of these loans. But the fact of the matter is that we do know that a significant portion of the owners of many of the debt that's on Americans' homes are foreign entities. So the point I frequently make is, if these foreign entities are hiding behind servicer names, how do we not know but that the people that are actually benefiting from these foreclosures are foreign governments? Michael, you tracked down that one of the purchasers of Fannie Mae bulk sales was actually related to a foreign entity. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I come back.
Okay, great. We'll hold that one for over the break, and wait till you hear who's taking property to America based on Fannie Freddie bulk sales.
Hey guys, Charlie McGrath here at WideAwakeNews.com, and I'm here to tell you I believe that Chris and the folks over at SeedsNow.com offer the best product at the best prices with the best service of anybody in the market. But don't take my word for it. Listen to what some of their customers have to say. Joshua in Florida writes, exceeded my expectations. Shipping was prompt and a number of my plants are already starting to sprout. Thanks for being great. And Ryan in California writes, I just received my Homestead Seed Bank, my all-in-one prepper pack, and seed-to-seed storage and growing guidebook, and I could not be more pleased. Thanks, Seeds Now. Now I can start growing and get off the GMOs. Keep up the great work. And the list goes on and on. Guys, it's time to make SeedsNow.com an integral part of your long-term preparedness strategy. Please call them at 877-344-4669. That number again, 877-344-4669, or better yet, visit them today at SeedsNow.com.
If you're taking 1, 2, 5, or more nutritional supplements, please stop. Simplify your supplementation with Bio Superfood, the most advanced nutritional whole food supplement you can buy. Men, women, children, even Olympic athletes the world over have discovered Bio Superfood from BioAge.com. And now take just one nutritional supplement instead of many. The Bio Superfood formulas are whole food products composed with 4 of the most nutrient-dense algae found on Earth. Bio Superfood for the brain helps with focus, memory, clarity, and mood. If you can increase brain health, the rest of the body is a no-brainer. Bio Superfood has 0 toxicity and is safe for you and your family. Learn more and order your Bio Superfood formulas at BioAge.com, spelled BIOAGE.com, BioAge.com, or call 877-288-9116. That's 877-288-9116. BioAge, the age of advanced organics.
Are chemtrail geoengineering programs changing our weather and destroying our environment? Why in the world are they spraying?
They want to create a storm in the southeast, then they'll start engineering out over the North Pacific. That's where the trade-ins will be.
Find out why critics are calling Why in the World Are They Spraying the most important film that is revolutionizing the environmental movement.
It's just going to get worse until the point where we're not going to be able to grow anything at all unless it's a Monsanto genetically modified, abiotic stress resistant seed.
Why in the world are they spraying? New international version with languages available from around the world. For 1 month, Rinse listeners receive free shipping. Go to the banner on the front of the Rinse website and click on the link for more info.
It's all about money, and weather is another form of commoditizing, the way the Central Command Group can commoditize another form of our life.
Why in the world are they spraying?
And if you control the weather, you're going to control the planet. It's that simple.
Make a promise, take a vow, trust your feelings, it's easy now. Understand the voice within.
All right, back after a little break here. Thanks, everyone, for hanging with us. We got Charlie McGrath here monitoring us. We're enjoying all the feedback we're getting here in the chat room. I'm with my guest here, Micheal Olenick. My name's Matt Weidner. My website is Matt Weidner, WEIDNER law.com. And Michael's a guest columnist on a website called Naked Capitalism. We'll get to that in just a minute. But what we were talking about just before the break was the fact that foreign institutions and entities are quite literally taking title and taking possession to the dirt of America in neighborhoods all across America. And let's be real clear and specific about this. Let's not just talk conspiracy stuff on the internet. Let's talk about what I mean, Michael. So what do I mean when I say that foreign entities are taking title to America?
Right, so we're looking at bulk sales. I did an article on bulk sales where Fannie and Freddie decided to auction off blocks of houses they set up these limited liability corporations, and they set them up under kind of shady terms. They would move property to one, from there they'd move it to another, from there they would, and the gist is, when we tracked down one of them, the address it came out to was a specialized bank that had a teeny number of branches in the U.S., and really just specialized in moving money to and from Asia, the Philippines, and from the Philippines really to other parts of Asia. And it was real clear. Fannie Mae was selling off a bunch of people's houses using government subsidies, massive government subsidies, to sell off people's houses off to Asian banks. So it was unlike anything. That was like something other things I've seen, but really.
Okay, so if you're not angry enough about foreclosures yet, and you see your neighbor getting thrown out, or you might be getting thrown out, you should really be angry when you understand that the beneficiaries of this are foreign entities and institutions. And so now we're going to transfer into one of the most egregious and disgusting examples of the connection between these banks and institutions and our government working against us, the American people, to benefit the interests of the small and the bankers. And I'm talking about GMAC Residential Capital. You know, GMAC, when Residential Capital, filed bankruptcy in the Southern District of New York. And when they did that, they took with them billions of dollars worth of loans, both auto loans and primarily home loans. We'll talk about that primarily because that's the one I'm most familiar with. But, you know, we all know that the federal government rushed, bailed out GMAC, and one of the aspects of that was the GMAC mortgage unit. And when that GMAC mortgage unit filed bankruptcy, remember there's two sides to that business. The first is They own all these assets, hundreds of thousands of mortgages and loans all across this country that Americans are continuing to make their mortgage payments on a monthly basis. That's the asset. The liability is they've got some liability in these cases, but the fact of the matter is the banks and institutions, the bankers that run these things, are able to take away the good parts of it, the asset, and then not be stuck with any liability. I was in New York City. We made this bold attempt to have a borrowers committee established within the context of that GMAC bankruptcy. I was there right in the shadow of the World Trade Center in the lower district of New York, where we were trying to have a voice for American citizens. Now, while we were there, PricewaterhouseCoopers was there making a petition to be paid more than $250 million. $250 million. They were asking to be paid as part of that bankruptcy. Mike, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what that is all about?
So what they were doing is they've agreed to review these loan files, and I'm sure Matt could say, but every foreclosure defense lawyer, for fraud on behalf of the government, all these banks told the government, okay, we're sorry, we're going to have the loan files reviewed for fraud, and this is something foreclosure defense lawyers regularly do when they pick a loan file up. It typically, I've asked a few of them, takes anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 hours for experienced ones to pick it up and say, this is a problem and that is a problem. And by the way, they find problems in, I'm hearing the numbers, 95, 98, 99%. They can find a problem. Well, PwC is doing the auditing on behalf of GMAC, and the rates they're charging for associates, they charge $235 an hour, and senior associates $300 an hour. Now, I had an insider contact me from one of these review firms, and their associates are literally coming out of they're like people who were laid off from Starbucks. I mean, these are pretty much minimum wage employees. Senior associates might have be paralegals in an unrelated field. A team member might be in a related field. Managers are billing at $370 an hour. That's more like a paralegal who actually has some background in property. Senior manager at $470, managing directors at $610, and partners at $630. What I found was that the average loan review was costing just under $11,000, about $10,500. And to put everything into perspective, I looked at the average pay for a private practice, a family doctor, at the 90th percentile. So a well-paid, family practitioner, and they were making about $900 a day. So you can get an hour and a half of a PricewaterhouseCoopers partner who has no background in property law, no background in any of this, to look at a file, or the entire analyzing if something's wrong with it. Or you can have a doctor spend the entire day figuring out what ails you medically, and it'll cost the same amount of money.
And I got to tell you something, Michael. You would not believe what it felt like to sit in that courtroom in Lower Manhattan, Southern District of New York Bankruptcy Court, where you had about 100 lawyers in the room. I figure they're averaging $500 an hour, all of them sitting in there, picking on this carcass, and then the group of PricewaterhouseCoopers people sitting there petitioning to get this $250 million. It just blows your mind to think that this, let's look at GMAC as like a public utility owned by us taxpayers. And so the taxpayers that are propping up this carcass, we are the ones that are paying this $250 million. This is not private money that the banks and institutions are paying around with. This is the taxpayer money. This is every single American that's still making a mortgage payment to GMAC, or maybe a car payment, or even student loans if they're into that. But the fact of the matter is that this is not their money they're playing with. This is our money as taxpayers. And the thing that's most frustrating about this is that there is no sense of outrage out there around America. And one of the big reasons for that, Michael, is the fact that people just don't know where to turn to for good information. And I'm going to do that by segueing into what sites can people be turning to get good information.
Right, there's Naked Capitalism that I write for is run by Eve Smith, and she has a strong group. There's your blog. You gave, what's your address, Matt?
It's just Matt Weidner Law.
Matt Weidner Law. Okay. Zero Hedge, Fire Dog Blake, and then what? I really would encourage people to go to the source. Look at government documents. Do not read the headers. Read the executive summary. Don't pay much attention. skip page 1 or 2, get down to the data, because it's really hard and they get in a lot of trouble. They tend not to lie in the data. Occasionally you'll get a bureaucrat who I'm assuming is retiring sometime soon who might slip into a report something honest, but the raw information in those reports oftentimes says something very different than the summarization of the raw data says, and there's good info there.
One of the things that I find so interesting, again, looking at sites like Naked Capitalism and Zero Hedge and Firedog Lake, is you have people there that are really telling things like it is. And you know, if we look at Wall Street Journal or we look at New York Times, even these mainstream news sources, they report news, but they don't report the documents that they're reporting on, and that's so frustrating. Well, look at your article on Naked Capitalism on this GMAC, and I wish I could pronounce that German word, but it's going to be linked here to the website. But the fact of the matter is that when you write about something, you don't just write and give your analysis, you refer back to the documents that are actually there. And that's so important because, you know, again, if we're in this space of informed people and we want to make arguments and we want to share our opinions with people, we need to be able to, with authority, cite back to the sources from which we're quoting or where we're coming up with our information. So important these days.
A week or two before that, I did another piece on Fannie and Freddie, another bulk sales sweetheart deal. They gave away where Countrywide had given out 2 loans, same day, same time, same origination, one for 80%, one for 20%. Countrywide kept, Bank of America inherited the 20% loan. The 80% loan went off and to Fannie Mae eventually, we keep talking about our tax dollars. Really, Matt, we both have young kids. It's our children and their children.
Right.
Okay, it's not our tax dollars because they're just borrowing from our kids.
That's absolutely right.
Right, we would be wage slaves if it was our tax dollars. There'd be nothing left. So they just take it from our kids and from their kids, borrow it from China, borrow it from who knows where else, whatever. So they were doing that, and they turned around and they paid off this claim. They threw these people out and sold out this condo at lower than fair market value. But the condo was appraised for $260,000. This is a real case, one of the bulk sales. We tracked down a specific property, and was selling for $40,000, and that's in 2 years. Yeah. So how could they turn around and just say, if somebody had said to the government, "Oh yeah, I'm borrowing you or I," we took out a small business loan and sent in an appraisal. It says this thing is worth $260,000, and then it was worth $40,000 2 years later. They would send in law enforcement. Right.
Look, we have these examples all around the country as these people are listening on the radio programs tonight. You're driving around your neighborhoods, you're seeing a vacant house that you know is in foreclosure, you think you might want to get it, you want to put an offer in it. You're not going to get that sweetheart deal to be able to buy that thing for 10 grand or 20 grand or 40 grand. But China or one of these bulk sale investors, they're the ones that are going to get the deal, and they're getting the deal based on our backs, the money that we, and you're right, it's not our money, it's our kids' backs, but our kids are the ones who are going to be paying for that. So, look, people need to be infuriated when they drive by these homes that the Wall Street and banks and institutions are foreclosing on. They need to be infuriated when they drive by these banks and see what the banks and institutions are doing with the full power of the federal government, and really suffering no consequences, profiting enormously. And that's the thing that's so disturbing for all of us. One of the things that I find so encouraging about the people that listen on this radio program and others is we're realizing now, look, we got to turn away from all this because we're not going to change that system. We have to be reliant on ourselves and, building communities of people that we can rely on. What it's all about. So I have to go.
Another kid my age drugged under a Jeep, taken and bound and found later under a tree. I wonder if he thought the next one could be me. You see, the soldiers that are out today, they brush the dust with bulletproof vests away. It's ironic, at times like this you pray, but a bomb blew the mosque up yesterday. There's bombs on the buses, bikes, roads, inside your market, your shops, your clothes. My dad, he's got a lot of fear, I know, but enough pride inside not to let that show. My brother had a book he would hold with pride, a little red cover with a broken spine on the back. He hand wrote a quote inside. When the rich wage war, it's the poor who die. Meanwhile, the leader just talks away, stuttering and mumbling for nightly news to replay. The rest of the world watching at the end of the day, both scared and angry, like, what did he say?
Hey there, my name